Welcome back to our third and final installment of Imperfect Competition. In this chunk of video, we're going to be talking about oligopoly and monopolistic competition. So our last two forms of imperfect competition. We're going to look at demand and how competitive these markets are. We're still going to use the same stuff. In the last video, we looked at marginal revenue. We looked at it from the case of a monopoly, but we're going to do that exact same process if it's oligopoly or monopolistic competition as well. And we'll also get into some price discrimination. So oligopoly, there's only a few large firms. There's going to be some significant cost advantage to firm size. If you want to call it a duopoly, that means there's only two firms, two companies that exist. Your book does mention the word duopoly. I'm not really going to distinguish much between duopoly and oligopoly. They're just kind of in the same thing. It's not just one firm. They're going to operate by the same rules. We're going to get into game theory next week, so we'll talk about oligopolies and game theory, and that applies if it's two companies or 10. It doesn't really matter. There's going to be barriers to entry for small firms. Typically, there's really high startup costs. So it kind of says that in the last bullet point too, cost advantages of firm size. So usually because of economies of scale. And when we're looking at that long run average cost curve, to get to that point where you have lower curves, you have to be a big firm. And so the smaller companies just can't compete because they're going to have costs that are way too high. Customers aren't going to want to pay more to buy something from small companies. We can think of some exceptions to that. Maybe taste and preferences will change, but typically right now, consumer behavior, we just go for the cheapest thing. Products can be differentiated or perfect substitutes. So if you have a small number of firms, they can be selling identical products, or they can be different. Okay, some examples would be like AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. When we're looking at cell phone carriers, there really are just not a lot of options. Even some of the other firms that have popped up, like Mint Mobile, they still use like the same infrastructure. So I think Mint Mobile uses T-Mobile. There are some of those similar companies that also use Verizon networks as well. But the idea is that there really just are not a lot of options. And are they different or perfect substitutes? I would say these are probably differentiated because they don't provide exactly the same coverage. They do have some differences in where their cell towers are, what technology they use, but they are, fairly similar. Health insurance providers, they also possibly provide differentiated products and that you can get different doctors or access to different services, but sometimes they're very very similar. Cable TV, it does. I think it still exists right now. We'll see. A lot of people don't use cable TV anymore. You just get streaming services through the internet. But there are definitely places where you can't get the high speed internet for streaming, and people still do get TV through cable. You'll still see this a lot of times, like in hotels as well. And some of you may even have cable TV at your house or your parents' house, so you might know what this is. But previously, prior to streaming, like before you could watch Netflix and things just directly to your TV, the way to watch a lot of TV was through cable. So if you didn't pay for a certain channel or a certain set of channels, you just couldn't watch something. And a lot of the cable companies would provide all the same channels. So if you go with this cable company, you get Food Network and TLC and MTV. You go with this cable company, you also get those same channels. They tried to have some differentiation, like maybe they offered some different things, but generally they were very close substitutes. You can also think of like airlines; they fit very well into oligopoly. Uh, they We'll talk about differentiation in just a minute. Some of them though are identical. It doesn't matter, you're going to get there if you fly on this plane or that plane, and unless you're in a nicer seat, you possibly don't even notice. So we'll see that in an oligopoly, firms do try to differentiate because it helps them keep prices higher, maybe gives them a bigger market share. But if it's, two firms, three firms, and depending on what it is, they may just be providing identical perfect substitutes. So oligopolies might compete with each other, or they might try to collude and keep prices higher. And we are definitely going to get more into this next week when we look at our chapter about game theory and the idea that sometimes they can work together to keep prices higher, sometimes they can't. especially if it's, in a legal agreement. But if they collude, they're going to act like a monopoly. They'll have higher prices. If they compete with each other, it's going to be more competitive and prices will be lower. And depending on the market, how hard it is to get in the market, they may be able to successfully cooperate with each other and collude, or they may have to compete and charge the lowest prices in their particular market. Monopolistic competition, this is the other market structure. This is most like perfect competition. So the competition here is the important part. It meets most of those characteristics. There's a lot of firms, a lot of different options. There's free entry and exit into the market. The main difference here and why it's monopolistic, so it's kind of like a monopoly in the sense that products are different. So if you're looking at a smartphone, an iPhone is not identical to like a Samsung Galaxy phone. They are substitutes. They do similar things. You definitely can switch between one or the other, but there's a brand name, there's things you might like about one phone versus the other. And so it's a monopoly in the sense that only one company can make an iPhone. But it's not really a monopoly because there's lots of substitutes and so it's competitive. And so we're going to call this structure monopolistic competition. And so when we're looking on that scale, we've got perfect competition, which is our most competitive, all the way over here to monopoly, which is least competitive. Oligopoly is kind of on the monopoly side. Monopolistic competition is over on the perfect competition side. Now, how competitive it is, it really just depends on what industry you're talking about, what segment of the market. There's a lot that goes into this, but competitors can join. There's not a lot of barriers to entry. Oligopoly, it's hard to get in the market. So it's most similar to perfect competition. A large number of rival firms, so they're selling similar products, competing with each other, but the products are not perfect substitutes. So if you lose your iPhone today and you go get a Galaxy, it's not going to be a seamless transition. There's going to be a big learning curve. It's going to be hard to transfer your stuff. You're going to have to restart a lot of things. It will be difficult. So Apple versus Samsung, McDonald's versus In-N-Out, PCC versus Citrus College. These all sell similar things to their competitors, but they're not identical. Okay, so Apple versus Samsung. Which one is more popular? You can go check that one out. What about McDonald's versus In-N-Out? PCC versus Citrus College. So, okay, if you currently, let's say you currently have an iPhone or a MacBook and you lose it, it breaks, whatever. If you're going to buy a replacement, you're probably going to buy another Apple product. So these are typically you're not going to see a customer switching between products very frequently. It does happen. So I used to have a MacBook and then I had some issues with it and I switched over to like Android and PCs. But most people just kind of stay. What about McDonald's versus In-N-Out? I bet a lot of you go to both of those places. I definitely do, especially now that I have kids and they are very into McDonald's. My daughter likes there's not very much meat on it. She mostly can taste the bun. She likes the toys she gets. But in my personal opinion, I think In-N-Out makes better burgers. I feel like they're healthier, better quality. I personally think they taste better, but I do definitely eat both of those. What about PCC versus Citrus? So both of these are community colleges. They're in a similar area. Are any of you taking classes at both schools right now? Maybe some of you, yes. And if not there, maybe some you might be taking class at Glendale Community College or Mount Sac. Especially with the online options now, a lot of people are taking classes all over the places. They're not perfect substitutes, though. If you're enrolled as a student at PCC, you can take classes through the virtual college exchange easily. You can take one or two. But if you're already at that limit, you may have to go enroll in Citrus. You now have to be dual enrolled, which makes it difficult for financial aid and other things if you're using those services. For me, I work at PCC, and it's not going to be very easy for me to work at Citrus College without having to quit my job. I maybe could be an adjunct there, but be easier for me to adjunct at PCC. So while they are, like similar, and they do provide similar services, and maybe you don't notice the difference if you take Econ there versus Econ here. They're still not perfect substitutes. They're still different professors, different locations. So the closer the substitutes are to each other, the closer to identical, the more competitive the market will be. So McDonald's and In-N-Out are probably closer to each other than Apple and Samsung, especially if you're talking about smartphones. We're going to see prices are going to be lower in the burger market. Profit margins are probably going to be lower as well per item compared to other markets. Now, this is just going to depend. It's going to change all the time. It might be true when I'm talking about it while making this recording. It might not be true when you're listening to it. Other stuff can change, so you may want to look into some of those things if you're interested in these markets. And especially if you are into like investing in individual stocks and you want to get into that stuff, you really want to know all those details about each company, their market share, all that kind of stuff. Market share, while I mentioned that, I don't know if I talked about this in an earlier video, but market share is like the percentage or proportion of the customers one firm has. They control, they sell to, whatever you want to decide it. And so sometimes people will say like, oh, Apple's a monopoly because they have so many of the customers. Or Walmart is a monopoly because they get most of the customers. And just because you have a large market share doesn't make your company a monopoly. So it could be that everybody just likes Apple products more, or everybody just likes In-N-Out more, and they could have a bigger market share. Like tomorrow, everyone could decide McDonald's is gross or it's not healthy. We're just going to all go to In-N-Out. That doesn't make In-N-Out a monopoly necessarily, because there's still easy entry into the market, and another burger company could just start coming and making burgers that are more similar to In-N-Out, or they could figure out, what customers are missing from In-N-Out and provide that as well. So one of the things that it is required to make it a monopoly is that barrier to entry. It has to be difficult to make a competing product. And in these markets, we have patents and copyrights, legal protections. So nobody can go make an iPhone. I can't just go start my own iPhone company and sell iPhones. I could create a smartphone and sell a similar product, but legally I'm not allowed to sell iPhones. And so that sort of gives them that protection and limits competition of that identical thing. But I could go make something similar. I could say iPhones are dumb because of these reasons. I'm going to go make something that doesn't have those problems, and I could potentially make money. I could lose money. I could take market share. But it's not the same as perfect competition where everybody faces identical costs. So if you were talking about a market with perfect competition, if there is positive economic profit, remember, people will enter the market and eventually it'll drop down to zero. In monopolistic competition, that's not necessarily the case. So, say monopolistic competition, there's positive economic profit. I could join this market. I could create my own cell phone company, Professor Johansson's Cell Phones, and I'm probably not going to put a dent in Apple. They're still going to make the same amount of money. It's not going to impact them. I'm probably going to go out of business and lose money because I don't know how to make cell phones. It was a terrible idea, right? So in perfect competition, everybody's making the same thing, and so anyone else who enters the market takes part of that market share potentially. In monopolistic competition, that's not the case. So Apple can have 80% of the market, and 10 new people can join making cell phones, and Apple can still have 80% of the market. And so there's a lot more potential for positive profit in the long run, even if there's a lot of competition. So unlike perfect competition, raising prices does not eliminate all customers. So we will see a decrease in quantity demanded. We still have a downward sloping demand curve. So every time you raise prices, guess what happens? You lose some customers. However, all the other people still paying you are going to be paying you more than they were before. So there is still potential for profit. How elastic the curve is, how sensitive your customers are to changes in prices, is going to determine that impact on total revenue and that impact on profit. Now, obviously, if you're a monopolist, you would prefer if your customers are inelastic. You're going to raise prices and lose a lower relative percentage of your customers. If you have really elastic market, it may not be in your best interest to raise prices very much. So depending on how steep that curve is, will sort of determine how much of that profit is. So one of the I guess strategies of companies like Apple or Samsung or companies with really strong brand names is to get you like hooked on their brand because that makes you more inelastic. You like that product more. If prices go up, you're more likely to hang on to it. Uh, some people will always still leave, but they'll just get to keep more of their customers. And so we'll see that we get positive economic profits in the long run. Okay, so how do firms differentiate their products? So there's a couple ways. So first, horizontal differentiation. This makes products different so that they're better for some people and worse for others. Okay, so I would argue that iPhones and Galaxy phones probably fit in here. They both are, top tier phones. They're kind of at the top of the pile, considered really high quality, also pretty expensive. And I mean, they really do deliver the same sort of functionality. However, they're just different in other ways. So iPhone has like one button. Galaxy phone has a lot of buttons. Uh, iPhone links to your iCloud and your Apple Watch and your MacBook, and Galaxy phone links to Galaxy Watch and Galaxy laptop and whatever. And there's just different ways that you access stuff. There's different ways that you save files and find files. And once you're kind of like into one brand, it makes it a lot harder to switch. Vertical differentiation is a product that, from everybody's perspective, it makes it a better product than rival products. So pre-iPhone, there were cell phones. And then iPhone came along and said, we have a smartphone. Our phone is way more advanced. It's way better. This would be vertical differentiation. This is just a better product. Okay, so just because it's a better product, does that mean everyone is going to switch? No, it doesn't. Why? Because not everybody needs that smartphone. There still is a market for old flip phones, things that are just good for texting, really like low tech stuff. There is a market demand for low tech, there's a market demand for high tech. And so we see that some of these low tech companies still exist because there's a demand for those products. They're low tech, but they're also going to be lower price. And the people who want all that high tech stuff, they're willing to pay that higher price. But it is still considered a better overall product. So horizontal differentiation, oftentimes they're competing for the same customers. They're trying to, iPhones and Galaxy phones, they want the high income, high tech, high demand users. And other companies come in and say, all right, well, we're going to produce a low tech version of the phone because we don't want to compete with those same customers. Sometimes companies try to reduce your choices through a commitment device to control behavior in a future period. So they want to do things to make you hooked to their product or their brand or their company so that you'll keep coming back. So some examples would be like membership to a health club or to Costco. In this area, we have Costco and Sam's Club, both like wholesale warehouse stores. And I mostly shop at Costco, but there are like some things I do really like from Sam's Club. But I have to decide like, do I want to have a membership to both? Usually no. Like I'm it's not going to be worth the money and the time to spend that. And so I just say, okay, well, I'm just going to only have a Costco membership and I'm going to shop only at Costco. If there was no membership required, I would definitely go to Sam's Club more often. Health club, this also would be like a gym. If you have a gym membership, you're going to keep going to that same gym. You may decide like you want a gym membership that has lots of different locations, so you still have some choice, but typically you're not going to get a gym membership to 10 different gyms at the same time. Advertising can highlight differences in products. It changes people's tastes and preferences. So if you see enough ads for something, you're probably going to like it more. So Coca-Cola advertises a ton, and people like Coke partly because of the advertising, partly because caffeine is addictive. Why do we like Coke more than Pepsi? Is Coke better than Pepsi? Probably not. I mean, they're extremely similar, and when you do blind taste tests, you get all sorts of interesting results. Sometimes Pepsi wins, sometimes Coke wins. Pepsi tends to win more often in blind taste tests, but the fact is, like, advertising plays a really, really big role in that, and it makes people like stuff more. Brand names are really big, really important for monopolistic competition, and in some ways, they ensure honesty. Now, what economists mean by honesty is that if you say your can of Coke has 150 calories, it actually has 150 calories. Or if you say that the Oreo is going to taste like an Oreo, every time someone buys an Oreo, it actually tastes like an Oreo. This is because it's very expensive to develop a brand name. It costs a lot of money. Advertising is a sunk cost. Getting a trademark, getting things patented and copyright, paying all those people to design a cool marketing campaign, all that stuff is extremely expensive, and it's a really expensive sunk cost. And so the only way for companies to sell enough and to make enough profit and revenue to pay for those high sunk costs, those high fixed costs, they have to deliver what they promise. So if you have a really great ad for something, it costs you $5 million, but your actual product sucks, people are going to return it, they're going to get their money back, no one's going to buy it, and then your company is going to lose that full sunk cost. Do Oreos taste better than generic sandwich cookies? This is technically a normative question. We could argue that, but I do think that, I mean, most people would agree Oreos taste better than just like whatever sandwich cookies. They also just have like a more consistent quality. Sometimes when you buy like the really cheap chocolate sandwich cookies, like even all the cookies in the package aren't even the same color as each other. Some of them are light brown, some of them are darker brown. But Oreos, it's like you just expect everything to be there, and you expect the cookies not to be crushed, and like there's just expectations. So they have to deliver something that tastes good, that has a consistent quality, that's going to meet customer expectations, because otherwise you're just not going to buy it anymore. And so companies work really hard to do this. They also have to spend a lot of money to do this, which potentially eats at their profit. Next week, when we get into game theory, we're going to talk more about brand names and sunk costs of advertising. Some of it's really interesting. I wish we had more time to get into all of this stuff. So take some more classes, take a game theory class, read some books. This is all stuff that is very interesting. Brand names, they ensure higher quality, but they also mean that we're going to have higher prices. So you could think about medication. So ibuprofen is a common painkiller. You could get generic ibuprofen, or you can buy the name brand Advil. Advil is going to cost you more money for the exact same quantity of medication than just a generic version. Why would you want to buy that? We'll get into some of that. I think we have a chapter we're going to read later, article that goes into like, should people pay more for brand name stuff? You will get a more consistent quality. You could definitely trust that you're getting the exact milligrams from Advil and the generic ibuprofen, Walmart brand. Who knows? Maybe their quality control wasn't great. Maybe you actually get too much or too little. Advil puts a nice little coating on the outside so it tastes better, it looks better. They do some stuff because they're like, hey, you're paying us more money. There needs to be some reason for it. So firms try to differentiate. They can do this in monopolistic competition or oligopoly. Monopolies don't need to do this because they aren't competing with anyone else. Perfect competition can't do this because they're charging or they're selling identical products. So this is just going to be true for oligopoly and monopolistic competition. The other two don't have differences in products. So when we look at perceived demand, this is really talking about the portion of the market demand that an individual firm faces. This is from OpenStax, which is an online textbook that you guys can access if you want to get into some more of these details. It's in chapter 10 of their microeconomics book. And sort of the idea is that here we've got B in the middle. This is monopoly. This would represent the whole market demand. And perfect competition's on the left, where they just get like a tiny a tiny chunk of the market and they're price takers, so they're stuck at that market price. And then over here for monopolistic competition, we're going to see that it's it kind of in between those two. So it's not as like steep as our monopoly and it's not as flat as our perfect competition. It's somewhere a little bit in between. And so as markets become more competitive, we're going to see their curves get closer to that flatter chunk. And as they become less competitive, we're going to see it getting closer to monopoly. So if this was like an oligopoly, let's see, the oligopoly would be here, monopolistic competition here, perfect competition here. Pretend that's a straight line. Here, I'll try to read it. Nah, that's even worse. Okay. So, and then oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and then perfect comp. So every time you add more competitors, basically their ability to raise prices and capture bigger chunks of the market goes down. So more competitive markets are going to be better for consumers because it means prices are going to be lower. And as you have less and less firms, they can act more like monopolies and capture that chunk. And some of this also is because when we add these curves together, we add them horizontally, we get bigger quantities. But you don't need to worry about that right now. Basically, the idea is that each firm gets some chunk of the market, and more competitive markets have flatter individual demand curves. When you see this on the test or on the problem set, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So we'll have a market with the demand curve, marginal revenue, marginal cost, average total cost. You won't be able to tell the difference between monopolistic competition, monopoly, oligopoly. Those are all going to look the same from your perspective. The only difference is going to be if it's perfect competition, you're just going to have a straight line at the price. All right, so let me know if you've got questions about that. We're also going to calculate profit for the all imperfect competition the same way. So we're going to take that point where marginal cost intersects the marginal revenue curve and then go up to the demand curve to find the price that's being charged. And then find where that quantity also hits the average total cost. Find the quantity. Okay, so go back to the last video if you don't remember this. Even though we looked at it from a monopoly perspective, it's the same for all three imperfect competition structures. And then perfect competition is just a straight line for demand and marginal revenue. So for a monopolistic competition, they can have short-run positive profit. We're going to assume that they're not going to operate if they're losing money. And in the long run, this will entice new entry into the market. So iPhone's making a ton of profit for a long time. You're definitely going to see more people developing new phone companies. Or current phone companies developing more stuff. And when this happens, it shrinks the demand for each individual firm. So we're assuming there's still some overall market demand. And they're not. That's fine. Can you guys see that? Okay. Pretend if you don't know what I'm talking about. All sorts of weird things are happening. My computer is ready for the weekend. Okay. So some market demand, and if you have two firms, right, they each get like a smaller chunk of that. Okay. So let's say they each have half the demand. If there's two firms and then there's 10 firms, they each get a tenth, or maybe one person has 50% or whatever. But every time you have a new competitor that enters the market, we're going to see it shrinking the demand from the other firms. So iPhone's still going to have a ton of the market share, but every new competitor is just going to take a little bit away from that, especially when you're looking at new customers. And so eventually prices are going to go down in the long run to average total cost without new innovation. Now, it's not going to be to this same point as a long run competition. It's going to be somewhere over here We're just going to see that demand curve sort of shrinking until price equals average total cost. There's a couple of extra graphs in your book, and there's a longer section on this if you want more explanation. We're not going to really focus on that for like our problem sets or our exam. I just want you to know that it definitely happens. So monopolistic competition is great for customers because it does mean prices will go down to a point where there's lower profit. This also means we're going to see a lot of innovation, constantly evolving. That's why you see new iPhone every couple of years. Sometimes it's because their patents or copyrights are expiring, but also it's because they're trying to make something new, get new customers. They want us to spend more money. They want to keep their profit high. It's not going to be at the lowest point of average total cost. I like how I put it in all caps. Apparently, I need to change this to a single thing. I'll fix that for the slides. Okay. It's important. It won't be at the lowest point of average total cost. Okay. So these markets are always going to be inefficient. So even if it's really, really competitive, I want you to know it's never going to get to the point where it's at that lowest point of average total cost like it would be in a perfectly competitive market. And so we're always going to see some inefficiency in these markets. Things are being produced at too high of a price, too low of a quantity, and it's benefiting the firms. It's also benefiting customers and consumers because we are getting lots of innovation, lots of new products. We're getting all of these things that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise without that incentive. We're still going to calculate profits the same way. So we're going to find that point where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. Go down. This is going to tell us our optimal quantity, which in this case looks like it's 2150. We're going to go up to the demand curve to find the price. Okay, so the price is going to be at $10.40. We're going to go to the average total cost to find out that it's going to cost $9.20 to produce this quantity. And then we can calculate our profit. So profit is going to be total revenue minus total cost. So total revenue is going to be $21.50 times $10.50 minus our total cost, which is $21.50 times $9.20. So it looks like they're making, I said $10.50. It's supposed to be $10.40. $10.40. So they're making $1.20 profit per item above their cost. So $1.20. This firm is making $2,580 of profit. So after all of their opportunity costs, fixed costs, everything, this means they're making that much more than what their other option would be. So you're going to calculate this the same way, whether it's an oligopoly, a monopoly, or monopolistic competition. Find marginal cost equals marginal revenue, go up to price, go down to quantity, and then go to average total cost. Okay, so which quantity should be produced? All right, we're going to do an example here. And we're going to be using a table. So not a graph this time. And you started a tutoring business. You want to figure out how many people you should tutor per week. Your production costs are relatively low. You have to pay for gas, paper, pencils, and you're going to spend $5 for each tutoring session for those materials. Then we're also going to assume you have opportunity cost of $20 per session. So your marginal cost for each session is going to be $25. We're going to assume you charge the same rate for everyone. So you're going to have a single price. And we're going to use our profit maximizing rule to figure out your optimal quantity and calculate your profit. Why isn't it showing up? Okay. We're going to come back to this if you perfectly price discriminate. So ignore that for now, but we're going to come back to that. And then we're going to come back to this other one in just a second. So first, we're just going to figure out what your profit is. Okay, so customers. This is like quantity. You can have between 1 and 6 customers. Reservation price. This is going to tell us the demand in our market. So if one customer is willing to pay $65, 2 customers, the second one's willing to pay $55. That also means the first one will pay that. 3 customers would be $45. 4 customers, 35, 5, 28, and 6, 20. We also now need a marginal revenue curve. So we need to figure out what is the extra you're going to make from each customer. To do that, we first have to calculate total revenue, which is going to be price times quantity. So if I charge $65, I'm going to get 1 customer. If I have 2 customers, I'm going to charge $55. My total revenue is going to be $110. And then if we look at marginal revenue, do that all the way down. Marginal revenue is going to be the difference between them. So when I get my first customer, my marginal revenue is $65. Went from nothing to $65. But when I get that second customer, my total revenue goes only up to $110. So my marginal revenue is actually only $45. So when I add that second customer, even though they're both paying me $55, I only get an extra $45 because that earlier person would have paid me $65 and now they're only paying $55, if that makes sense. And we could do the same thing with the other ones too. So like if I charge $45, I'll get 3 customers. My total revenue will be $135. And my marginal revenue is only going to be $25 extra. Because even though I'm getting a third person to pay me $45 more, the other earlier 2 people are each paying me $10 less. Right? So from that third person, I'm getting plus 45, but then minus 10, minus 10. And then we want to do that all the way down. So total revenue and marginal revenue. Okay, you'll see that here. When I go to the 4th customer, my total revenue is $140. So price times quantity, price times quantity. 5th customer is also $140. So this is interesting because notice my marginal revenue is $0. If I add the 5th customer, even though I'm getting more money from that 5th person, I'm losing money from all of the other people. And so you can see how it's becoming a much bigger chunk, right? We're losing more and more money each time. And then all the way down to customer number 6. If I want 6 customers, I have to charge $20. And now I'm only going to make a total of $120, which is $20 less than having 4 or 5 customers. Now, we want to use our same rule here. So we're trying to optimize. We want to find the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So I want to make sure that that extra that I'm getting from tutoring one more person is going to cover that extra cost I have from tutoring one more person. So we're going to go through here and compare that to $25. So marginal revenue 25, yes. Marginal revenue 45, yes. Marginal revenue 25. We're going to also say yes here because it's equal to marginal cost. Marginal revenue of 5, no. 0, no. Negative 20, no. So it's going to be optimal for me to teach 3 students, tutor 3 students, and then stop there. My goal is maximizing profit. So if we are trying to figure out our profit, we want total revenue minus total cost. Okay, so total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue is $135. My total cost at 3 customers is going to be 3 times 25. So 75. And so our profit is going to be $135 minus 75. We're going to have a profit of $60. So this is the most possible profit we can make in this market. Now this bottom question says, does the quantity that maximizes revenue also maximize profit? The answer in this case is no. So our max revenue is $140. And our max profit is when we have revenue of $135. So let's see what we would have if we had 4 customers. So if I had 4 customers, my total revenue would go up. So I would have $140 in revenue. But my costs would go up to 4 times 25. My cost would go up to $100. And now my profit would drop down to 40. And if I had 5 customers, my profit would drop to 15. So our goal is not to maximize revenue. Our goal is to maximize profit. And we're going to use the rule where marginal revenue equals marginal cost to find that point. Okay, so let's go. We're going to come back to this in just a second. Let's talk about price discrimination real quick. So price discrimination happens when we're charging different prices to different groups. This can happen because buyers have different reservation prices. And in our equilibrium, all buyers pay the same price. But firms can actually get more customers if they charge different prices. So for example, you'll see like a lot of times you'll see student discounts. So maybe at the movie theaters or restaurants, or if you want to go to like a symphony concert, you'll see student prices. And that's because they know that students tend to have lower reservation prices than other people. They also are able to break people up into groups. You have to have a student ID. You have to have something that proves you're part of this group. And it's interesting because when this happens, it's going to increase total economic surplus. So it's going to make it possible for us to maybe even get to our socially optimal quantity. There is also the potential, though, to decrease consumer surplus. Sometimes it'll increase it a little bit from just the single price level. If we have perfect price discrimination, it can completely eliminate all consumer surplus, but it will be a better social outcome when we're looking at efficiency. Price discrimination can make markets more fair. So things like low income scholarships or Amazon Prime for students, it gives a way for people with lower reservation prices to still access those markets without negatively impacting profits from higher paying customers. Sometimes you can get theme park discounts if you're a SoCal resident. As a student right now, you can get discounts for lots of stuff, so figure out what all those things are and take advantage of it. So how do you find out a buyer's reservation price? You want to price discriminate. Maybe with your tutoring business, you want to be able to charge some people more, some people less. Some stores will do this through rebates. So a rebate is where, let's say you buy something and it's $30 at the store. So you have to pay $30 and they'll give you a rebate, which says if you fill out this really long form and send in your receipt and barcode, we will give you $10 back. We'll mail you a check for $10. And this is nice because people who would only want to pay $20 for this item, they will go through the hassle to get their rebate. And the people who feel like it's worth $30 or more, they will not do the rebate because rebates are a pain. They are not easy to do and they take a lot of time. Sometimes stores will sell scratch and dent models. So they'll take an appliance, like say this fridge, it's really nice, it works perfectly, but there's just a bunch of like scratches on the outside. This doesn't impact the way the fridge works, but people with a higher reservation price will want to buy the nice shiny new fridge that doesn't have that. And then people with the lower reservation prices will pay the lower price for the scratched model. You can also do this with like open box items. If you have a lower reservation price, you can buy the open box version, which usually just works the same. Typically, price discrimination, though, happens as discounts by group. So if you're a senior, you maybe can have lower prices for food, or a thrift store has senior day, student discounts, anything where you can discriminate by group. Companies will also offer tiered subscriptions. So you'll notice with like streaming services, you can get like the cheap base model, or you can pay more to remove ads. This is trying to get at people with different reservation prices. So if you have a higher reservation price, you'll just pay more money to get rid of ads because it's a waste of time. If you have a lower reservation price, you may need to keep those ads there or you wouldn't subscribe at all. So it's a way of getting at price discrimination. It will increase output. And it will increase output. It'll create a separate marginal revenue curve. So now when we price discriminate, all right, let's say we were going to stop here. Okay, so this price is, let's say, $50. But we want to charge this other smaller group of people here, we want to charge them $30. Let's say this is a student discount. So it's not going to impact all the people already paying $50. It's going to restart that marginal revenue curve at that $30 mark. So I'm going to go back to the last slide in just a second and show you how that would work. And then perfect price discrimination is where every single customer is paying their maximum reservation price. So everyone's paying their full amount. The firm knows everyone's reservation price. They can charge you that. Everyone's paying a different rate. This is going to maximize economic surplus. It's going to get us to that maximum level, but it's going to eliminate all consumer surplus. Okay, so let's go back to here. And let me show you what's going to happen with price discrimination. Okay, let me erase it. It's kind of messy. Okay, so first let's do perfect price discrimination. If we have perfect price discrimination, then the demand curve and marginal revenue curves are going to be the same. So if I charge the first person 65 and I could charge the second person 55 and the first person still 55, then my marginal revenue will be 55. And then when I add the third person, I charge that person 45. The other two people are paying the higher price. It stays, and so on and so forth. So perfect price discrimination, I'm going to charge everybody their maximum, and I'm not going to lose money from earlier people when I lower the price for the next customers. So if this was perfect price discrimination, in this example, we would actually have 5. We would tutor 5 people instead, because we're not going to be losing money from those earlier people. Now, there's also the other case of group discrimination. So let's say we have a discount for FYE pathway students. Okay. And so let's say the first 3 people are going to pay their normal price. We'll do total revenue and marginal revenue. That will all be the same, right? What was this, 135 and 25? And let's say these other people with reservation prices lower than 45, these are in our discount group. So they are going to be the only people who operate off the discount. We're going to treat them as a second set of demand. Different demand curve, different marginal revenue. So total revenue from that fourth person is going to be 35. Total revenue from the fifth person, that's going to be like charging 2 people at $28. So 28 times 2 would be 56. And then total revenue, from that third one is going to be 20 times 3, 60. Okay. Because it's not impacting the first 3 customers, it's only impacting the last 3 customers. And so we would do the marginal revenue the same over there. So 35 and then 56 minus 35, 21, and then 60 minus 56 equals 4. So if we could offer a discount, we offer $10 off. Because we want to capture this fourth person. They're going to use a coupon. They're going to get some kind of discount. We're not going to want 5 or 6. Whoops. We don't want 5 or 6 because our marginal cost is still 25. So this one's a little bit complicated, a little bit confusing. Definitely sleep on this, do some work, email me with questions, go to tutoring. The table sometimes is a little bit more confusing. But now you know how to profit maximize in imperfect competition. All right, I'll see you next week for game theory.